Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Lambda School mini bootcamp, where we are going to be working through 12 lessons live on live YouTube with you guys through YouTube and through Slack. We'll do the lessons on YouTube, and most of you should be in the Slack channel, and we have live help on there as well. So we're going to go through the 12 lessons. We started last night with an introduction to version control and Git and GitHub and getting these files cloned from Git. Tonight we're going to venture into HTML and CSS. And then, through the next 8 lessons after this, we'll cover more CSS. We'll cover 8 lessons on JavaScript. And then we'll cover some DOM manipulation as well and kind of wrap everything up. So thanks for joining us once again. This is the second lesson. If you didn't catch the first lesson, feel free to sit through this lesson, but then go back and we have all of our lessons archived on YouTube. And you can watch the first lesson there and get caught up with us. And then, we're going to have our first assignment tonight, and we'll kind of go over that. And then we'll be continuing on from this point. So if you didn't catch the first lesson last night, that's totally okay. Hang out with us through this lesson, and then go and watch the archive lesson that we have for lesson 1 from last night, and it'll get you caught up. But yeah, so once again, my name is Dan Frainer. I'm a computer science instructor here at Lambda School, and we're really happy to be able to offer this 3-week mini bootcamp course to everyone free of charge. And it really just gives you a great basis and a great introduction to the world of web development, and gets you started on the right path to be a web developer, and also kind of lets you know if you're going to enjoy this, kind of shows you what we do, and then you can take it as you want it. You're going to end up with a great little working app by the end of the class, the mini bootcamp here. And we do offer a full-time 6-month immersive bootcamp as well. And that is no money up front. We actually have this really great opportunity to allow all of our students to attend without anything up front. And then, it goes that when you graduate and you get a job, then you start paying back. So it's 17% a year for 2 years. And it maxes out at $30,000. And that's a developer job over $50,000 a year. If you get that after graduating, then you start paying it back. If you don't get a developer job making more than $50,000 a year, then you don't pay anything back. So it's a great incentive for both of us to work hard and to get you to the point you want to be. But that being said, this mini boot camp here is free of charge. And so, like I said, we're going to have 11 more, tonight included, 11 more lessons over the next 2+ weeks. And by the end of this class, you'll have a working little mini front-end web app that you'll be able to play with and show off to people, and it's a really awesome opportunity. That being said, we're going to get started with tonight's lesson. Tonight we're going to be covering the basics of HTML and CSS. So we're going to talk about an introduction to HTML, some basic HTML elements. Then we're going to introduce you to CSS, and we're going to talk about CSS selectors and the style element. We'll go through some basic CSS styling, and we'll introduce you to a concept called the box model. And then we'll talk about external style sheets and kind of how to pull our code apart and have an HTML file and a CSS file. And then that's where we're going to end tonight. So getting started here, quick introduction to HTML. HTML is a core building block of the internet. Every single web app or web page or anything you go to on the internet in your browser is going to have HTML in it. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's a language that browsers can read. Your internet browser, Google Chrome or Internet Explorer, Safari, Edge. It's a language that they can read to build a web page, and so they read through the code and they build the web page in front of you. It's not technically considered a programming language, but a markup language that's meant to be interpreted by web browsers and data presented in a graphical form. We're going to be learning about the basics in this course of HTML, and we're going to learn how it builds a web page. So that being said, let me share my screen and we can get started. So I'm using a web app here called CodePen. CodePen is a great app to play around with things. It's what we call a sandbox environment. It just allows you to write some little code snippets quick and see an instant output. You know, if we had HTML here, we'd say this appears on the screen. And so we can see it instantly what it's going to do. CodePen is not where you should be doing your assignments in. You should download some sort of text editor. I recommend VS Code, but there are a lot of other text editors out there. Sublime, Atom, those are probably the three most popular for web developers and students in our course. Visual Studio Code, Sublime, and Atom, and they're all free. Sublime does ask for a donation. But other than that, it's all free downloads. So VS Code and Atom are 100% free. But I'm just going to use this CodePen website to just kind of, we get an instant feedback from it. And then I'll show you at the end of the class tonight how to open up your file that you've cloned from GitHub yesterday, hopefully, and start working on the assignment for tonight. So HTML is made up of a series of what we call elements. And these elements are going to have data in between them. Each element is contained in brackets. So you're going to have brackets, and you have an opening and a closing bracket, just like this. And within these brackets is going to be the name of the element. So in this case, let's just write HTML, because HTML is an element. So this is an open and closing tags. This whole item here is an HTML element, and we call the opening and the closing, we call them tags. So you'll often hear developers talk about like, oh, put something between the tags, or they'll just refer to the element as a tag. It's pretty interchangeable. So the open tag, you can see, is just those braces, those brackets, and the name of the element. The closing tag is going to have that / before the name of the element. That's going to tell your browser that that's the closing tag, that it's done interpreting that as an HTML tag. Some tags you'll see are what we call self-closing tags. So an image tag is self-closing, and we'll have put more data in here in the future, but that's the makeup of it. So you don't need two of them. Each tag is either closing or needs a closing tag, or it's self-closing. And that's something that's going to come with not a lot of experience, but experience in using it. And the ability to go in and occasionally read the documentation, which there's a link in the bottom of your README on lesson 2 with some further documentation. But that's the kind of the general makeup of a tag. You'll either have an open and a closing tag if you want to include data between it, or what we call a self-closing tag here. So the first tag we're going to talk about is already on the screen. This is the HTML tag, and so, or element. So the HTML element is the building block of the entire page. All of your code is going to go between the HTML tags here. This is telling the browser what you're reading, and everything that's going to be in between this should be interpreted as HTML. There are a couple of different language tags that we can write in here, and we will get to that within this course. There's a script tag to tell the browser that it needs to interpret it as JavaScript. And then there's also a style tag, which asks the browser to interpret it as CSS. And those actually go within the HTML tags here. So the HTML tag is the building block of all of the entire page. All of our other tags are going to go within the HTML. So within the HTML, we'll see that the first element we'll talk about is the head. And so the first thing I want to point out is you'll notice the structure of the code here. We have our HTML tags farthest to the left, and then we have the other tags that are within it spaced and indented. And that indentation length is up to you, but most people use 2 spaces or a tab. And so it's always going to be indented, and this is going to give us readability within our HTML. So our HTML is going to have much more than 2 elements on the page. It'll have hundreds, if not thousands, on the page, and you need to know exactly where they are in relationship to the other elements. So it's a good habit to get into to start indenting your tags when they are the child elements, which is what this is, when they're inside of other tags. So the head element is telling the browser that we're going to load data or other elements within these tags, not to render to the page, but we want the data to load we want the browser to load the data. And so there's one item that will render to the page within the head, and it's the title. And so the title is not going to be on your web page here. You see there's nothing here. If this were a real web page here, the title is actually going to be what's in your tab up here. So the title of this page we're currently on is a pen by Daniel Frainer. And so we want something to appear up there. We just write the title here. It's not going to change the code pen because it's within the sandbox environment, but just know that that is where that goes. And it's considered the title of the website. It's not going to be on the actual page you see. Cool. And so there are a few other elements that go within the head. We'll be going over a couple more of those later within the course. But for right now, that's what we're going to leave it at because the important stuff comes within the body. So the body of the page is where we're going to find all the stuff we actually see on the web page itself. And it's all going to come between the 2 body tags. And so once we start adding elements, this is where they're going to go within the body tag. So this is what our page looks like right now. We have our HTML is our parent elements. And then that wraps everything else that's on the page. We have our head, and that wraps the data that we want loaded, but that's not necessarily going to be displayed on the web page itself. And then we have our body tags, and all the data that's inside of the body tags are going to be loaded onto the web page itself. And so that's kind of this is the basis of a website here. This is like the basic framework of it. We talked about, we have the head tags are indented a couple of spaces from the left because they are inside of HTML, and then the title is actually indented a couple spaces from where the head is because they are inside the head, and that allows us to skim through this and say, oh, the title's in the head, nothing in the body, but head and body are in the HTML. And it's really a great practice to get into to start doing that. So let's talk about some tags that are inside of the body and how we can start getting stuff to display on the page. The first one we're going to talk about is the paragraph tag, and it is just a P. So that stands for paragraph. This is going to be an element that displays text on the screen in a paragraph format. So it's going to go all the way from the left to the right of the screen. So you can see now we have text on our screen, And then this is in the paragraph tag right here. So it's always going to start on a new line. And we can see that if we put 2 paragraphs in there, it'll always start on its own new line there. And so that's the paragraph tag. It's just a P. The second we're going to talk about is called the span. And the span is just like a paragraph tag, except it's more of just a generic container. It's just telling the browser that, hey, what's in here is text, but it's not going to have that start on a new line thing that the paragraph does. So we can see that it's going to start right next to each other. It doesn't have the same properties that the paragraph does. And we can see that they're just going right in line with each other. So the paragraph is going to act like a new paragraph, and the span is just a generic text container. That's the span element. Another generic container that we use quite a bit is called a div or divider. All right. And so a div, it's really hard to display it right now, but it just creates a box around whatever you have in it. So I don't want to just put more text in here because it's going to feel just like the P or the span. But a div is just a generic box. And then when we introduce CSS in a bit, we'll see like why we would ever use a div. But just remember now, the div is just a generic container. It's primarily used for styling. And imagine it like a box that we can get to determine the exact color and shape and size and place other boxes in as well. The next element we're going to talk about is the anchor element. And so the anchor element is how we write links on a website. So we go href. The anchor element is going to introduce something new for us, and that's our attribute. The first attribute we're going to introduce is called href. And that is going to be written as href, the equal sign, and then open and closing quotes. And then within there, you're going to write where you want the link to go. Okay, so we see that there's nothing on the page yet. And so then we can write in here, school. And now we have a link on our page. And if we click it and open it up, it takes us to exactly where we had asked the href to take us to. So this is the anchor tag. Just know it as the link tab. It's how we tag. It's how we write links on web pages. So the next couple of tags or elements we're going to go over are the H1 through H6 elements, and these stand for header. And so when HTML was originally developed, it was developed with this idea of creating a newspaper on your screen. That's why we have paragraphs, we have headers, we have H1s, we have footers, we have all kinds of these kind of newspapery type tags to work with. So now, instead of using H1 through H6 to really justify the size of your font on the screen, because that's what it does, we use them now for SEO purposes. Google still reads these, and a lot of weight is given to H1s and H2s for SEO reasons. And if you're not sure what SEO is, don't worry about it. We're good for right now. But it's how Google and other search engines can get how popular your website is or what to display first. So we can just do this. So you'll see that the H1 is actually the largest of the H tags. And it goes down to goes H1, H2, H3, and it goes all the way down to H6. And you'll see that it does affect the size of your font. But when we get into styling, most developers just write the size of the font how they want it, but they use these for SEO reasons. So keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that the 1 doesn't refer to the size of it, it refers to how important it is. So 1 is the most important and 6 is the least important, and it goes 1 through 6 all the way down. The next HTML element we're going to introduce you to is the image. And so the image, as we saw before, is a self-closing tag. And the image takes something just like the anchor tag. They took the href. The image takes the source. So the source of the image, and then let's see if this still works. Pixel.com. You write where your image exists in here. And so you'll see that we have written a single tag. There is no closing image tag. There can be if you'd like, but this image is a self-closing tag. And we write the source of where our image is. Right here, I posted a random generic image that comes from a generic image generator. Oftentimes, this will be an image that's stored in the same folder, and you would use the source of that, the location on that folder, or the location of another, another place on the internet to find that image tag. Or the image source. So this is our image here. A couple other, this is going to change, and I think they're all pretty decent images. So a couple other tags that we can talk about. The last two are going to be the unordered list and the list item. So the unordered list is UL. Let me get rid of that just for purposes. So the unordered list is the UL, and this is if you want to create a list of something. And so you create an unordered list, and then within the unordered list, there's a list item, and it's an LI. Okay, and so then we can have as many LIs as we want. And so the unorderedness of the unordered list refers to the fact that it's going to use bullets here instead of an order. There is an ordered list, and then you'll see that they're using numbers, and the unordered list is really what is used much more often than ordered list. So just to kind of recap our HTML here, we'll see that we have the HTML element outside. Let's actually make that a little bit more clear, and we can add that back to the page. So the HTML element is our top level element. We'll see that it wraps everything the HTML does. Then within the HTML is the head. And so within the head element is the data that we want the website to load before we load the website, before we load the rest of the HTML. So this is eventually going to be where our JavaScript is loaded. It's going to be where our CSS is loaded. It's going to be where the title is loaded. Things like that are going to be in there. Things that we want to load, but we don't want to display on the page itself. Within the HTML is the body, and the body is going to be where all of our what we want displayed on the page is going to be loaded. And so everything that's loaded on the page is going to be loaded in the body elements. And so what we want displayed here, the first element inside of there that we talked about is the paragraph, and it's just a P, and we can see that it just displays as a paragraph. This is paragraph 1. We can, once we have multiple paragraphs, we know that paragraphs always start on new lines. So that's a feature of the paragraph tag, is it always starts in a new line. The next tag we have is the span element. The span is a generic text container that we can tell the browser that we're going to include some text on here. Don't treat it very special, like, the paragraph has its own ideas. The span is kind of its own thing. It's just generic text container. A generic container period is the div. And we'll be working, you probably use a lot of divs when you're working on developing HTML, just because divs are really useful for styling. At the moment, we don't have anything in our div, and it's just a blank div on the page. There's nothing there. The next item we have is the anchor tag. And remember, the anchor is going to create a link for us. It needs a flag, href, and where we want the link to point to. So when we click on that link, where we want it to go. And then before the closing tag, we can get what we want the link to say, right? So that's what's going to be displayed on the screen, and not what's in the href. Just keep that in mind. If you feel like you're having trouble remembering which tags are going to take hrefs and which tags are going to be sources, that's a very common feeling to have. And so you're going to be referencing Google and Stack Overflow and the official documentation a lot, especially when you start learning, because even seasoned developers mix those things up. So just keep that in mind. But just know that it does take the location. The next couple of tags we showed you are the H1 through H6, and these are the headline tags. So just always remember that 1 is the most important and 6 is the least important, and that's how they go. They don't go by the size. Although 1 is the largest, that's not really what they're supposed to be used for. They're supposed to be used to give the idea of the most important text on the screen. So 1 through 1, there is a 2 and a 4 and a 5 in here. I just didn't include them. But there is 1 through 6. The next is the image tag. So it's just img, and it needs a source. It needs a place to go grab the image from. And so that's going to be equals, and in quotes, they'll have the source. An image tag is a self-closing tag. So it's pretty cool that we don't have to include another closing image tag after that. We can just throw that in and close it. And the last couple of elements we've looked at were unordered list. And within an unordered list, we have list items. And so it goes down the list, and unordered list gives us these bullet points that separate the list items. And an ordered list would actually give you numbers there instead of bullet points. So the bullet points are actually used, or the unordered list is used quite a bit more often than the ordered list. So that is our introduction to HTML and some basic elements here. This is honestly, for the most part, probably 75% of the elements you'll use in HTML. Spans, divs, anchor tags, images, ULs, LIs, and then the H1 through 6 tags are all the most common tags we'll use. Now let's start talking about CSS. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And CSS, we like to give the analogy that if you're building a house, HTML is the raw material. It's the wood, it's the concrete and the bricks, and it's just in a pile on the ground. CSS comes in and adds style to it. So it's the how you build that house, how you paint it, how you decorate it. That's what CSS is. So HTML is great, but without HTML or without CSS, HTML is pretty plain and boring. As we can see right here, this doesn't look like a cool website at all. With CSS, we can transform all of this and make it look exactly the way we want to. We can change the sizes of things. We can change the colors of things. We can really change anything we see on this website. And it's the difference between, I like to say, like a black and white and a color TV. It just really adds so much more to your websites. So they kind of go hand in hand, HTML and CSS does. So before we can begin applying style to our web page, we need a way to tell the browser that we're going to be giving it some style rules. We can do this in a few different ways, and I'll show you those now. So this is going to be going inside of the head. All right, so we have our title up there. And so now we can introduce a new element called style. I'm going to, once again, get rid of that guy. We're going to say style. And now we can start writing CSS inside of here, right on our HTML. At the moment, we don't need a separate CSS file, but we will at the end. So within the style tags is where our style is going to go. So our style is going to go right here in between the style tags, inside of the head, remember. So in order for us to start applying styling rules to HTML elements, now that we have our style tags there, we need a way to select the items that we want to style. There are 3 different ways of selecting elements on a page in CSS. First and foremost, we have just the generic, we're going to select it by just calling out the name of the element. And what this is going to do is this is going to select every single element on the page with that element and apply the styling rules to it. We also can select by 2 other items. They're called an ID and a class. So an ID and a class are something that we are going to add directly to the elements themselves. So we're going to call this P, we're going to give it an ID of first paragraph. So first thing to point out about IDs, they go on the element just like you would see the href or the source on image. They go just in there like that. It's ID equals a open and closing quotes, and then whatever the name that you want to give that ID. It's all up to you, right? You like to be as verbose as possible in naming the IDs. And so IDs, understand, are unique. IDs can only be on one element. There's only one element can have the ID of first paragraph. I liken IDs to a driver's license or a social security card, where only one person has that ID number, right? Not every single person has your driver's license number. And so it's one ID per one element per ID. If you want to add a selector that applies to a lot of different elements, that's when we use a class. And so we do class just like we would ID. And then we say, let's go span class. And so the thing about classes is that we can give them to as many elements as we want on the page. To differentiate between them over there, let's widen this a little bit. All right, so this is our first span, this is the second span, and that's the third span. And they all have the class of span class here. And so classes, I like to refer to it as being in a classroom, where there can be 1 student in the class, or there can be 40 students in the class, and there's room for as many students as we want in this class, as many elements as we want. You can have a class only on one element, that's fine. But the beautiful thing about classes is that they're open to as many elements as you want. IDs are very pointed at exactly one element. We don't need to use anything else to access every element of a type that's already built in for us. So just know that right now, all of the styling should be going in between these two tags here. But since CodePen has built in some stuff for us, I'm going to put it in the CSS portion of this page. But understand that it would go in between here. So kind of want to walk you through how we would select different elements. You already saw that I did the P. Let's do the LI. So remember, we have 4 elements on here that are list items. So in order to select every single element of the same exact type, we just write the name of the element. CSS syntax then says you put a space in, and you have open and curly braces. So these open and close curly braces. So remember, these are curly braces. These aren't brackets. These are the curly ones. So open and close curly braces. And then there's really no code style rules to CSS, but this is how you'll see it written everywhere. You'll write the rules inside of those. The second way we can select an item is by using the ID. And in order to select the ID, we need to use the hash symbol or the pound sign or the number key, whatever you want to call it. That is telling CSS that we are selecting an ID. Okay, and so we give it the ID of, and we write the code in there. To select a class, we do a dot, and the dot is now going to tell CSS that we're looking for a class, and that find all of the elements of that class. And we can say a span class, and we do that. So this is how we select elements and start writing CSS properties and styling rules for different elements on the screen. Inside of the syntax of the styling rules themselves, are you going to have what you want to change about it? So this is going to be what we call a CSS property or method, and then we're going to have a semicolon or colon, and then we're going to write what we want to change it to, and then we are going to think what we want to change it to, and then we always need to end with a semicolon at the end. So remember the rule, a colon, what we're going to change it to, and a semicolon at the end. Okay. So that's how we write rules. And you can see over here that we've applied the color rule to the list items. So color is always going to be the font color. If we wanted to change the background color of this, we would have to change it by background color. So anytime you see color, that's always going to be the font color. So we can take that and move it over to the paragraph, and it's going to see where we've changed the paragraph, the P tag, to red. We can do the same for span, and it's going to change the font color, right? So let's go and grab our div here, and we're going to give it an ID of div ID. And let's say we're going to ask for the ID. So let me just kind of clean this up a little bit. To get an ID, we give it the hash, and we give it the name, div ID. Okay. And so I'm going to add a border to this div, and it's probably not going to appear super well on the screen right now because we don't have a height or width for it. But I'm going to give it a border, and to give something a border, you first have to give it how wide, how thick you want the border. The style of the border, we're going to say solid, and we'll give this blue. Okay, so we can kind of see that that div is just nested in there in between our span and our A tag. So to give this div some body to it, we can give it a height and a width tag. So let's give it a height of, oh, we want more than 10 pixels. We have 100 pixels. 100 pixels, width, 100 pixels. So now we see we have this div that actually has something to it. There's some spacer inside of it. It's got a border, and let's change that border to make it a little more clear. There we go. There's our div right there. Let's add span inside of it. There we go. This is the div inside of here. Okay, so we've given it a height and a width. So on every element, you might not be able to give a height and a width to, but you can give padding. And so padding is going to be an invisible margin between the content inside of your element and the border. So let's give this padding of 10 pixels. Now you see that there's an invisible 10 pixel border all the way around the content here. So that's padding. Remember, it goes content, padding, and then border. And then outside of your border, you can give it a margin as well. So let's give that 50 pixels to make it really pop out. So now we have a 50 pixel invisible border around the border part. So this is referred to as the box model here. The box model says the content is the innermost, the padding is around the content, the border is around the padding, and the margin is around the border. Okay, and so that's the box model there. There's a little bit more about the box model and calculating the actual size of it, but we won't get into that tonight. Another cool thing to deal with, as we said before, background, or we will specifically want to affect the color of the background. We can say background color. And then let's go, we'll just do green, because that will make it weird. Cool, so now we've changed the background color, what's inside of that border, to green. There's another, we can also change the background if we use a URL. So let's do this. We know it's should be 110. Let's go. .com/100 by 100. So we should get a background image in there now. And you can do that by using background and then the URL and then wherever that image lies. Now we can make the background that URL or that image. One other thing I'll talk about right now, and actually I want to, it's distracting, is the font size. So we have the paragraph, which we have our first paragraph. We can tell that we've selected it by the ID because we have that hash symbol and the name of the ID. We've changed the color. Let's change the font size. We're going to change the font size to 34 pixels. I should blow it up nice and big. So now we've changed the size of that. And then we can, I mean, you can see we can change it to 3 pixels and it's tiny, tiny. We can change it to 300 pixels and it's massive. Let's change it to 30. And so now we have the ability to change the size of the font. And so that's why we said we don't have to use these H1 through H6 tags to change the size of the font. we want to use them to talk about the importantness of the text in there. But just know that you can use font size to change the size of the actual font in there. So the final thing we'll talk about is using, instead of using style up here, if you had all of your CSS in a separate file like we do here, this is going to be called styles.css or index.css. We can then talk about the link element. Actually, the link element is self-closing, so the link element is going to take, is going to need two of these attributes in it. First is the rel, and it's going to need to be called Stylesheet. So this is telling the browser that the link that the file we want to load into it is a style sheet. That's what it's doing. And link means link a file into it. And then we're going to do an href, just like we did with the anchor tag. And I see you remember me talking about how it gets kind of confusing which one it is, href or source. That's where it goes right there. So it's going to be href for link, and it's going to be the name of the file and where it is. So it's usually right in the same folder as your HTML file, and to write that is the dot and a forward slash, and then just the name of the file. And then that will, as we see in this case, imagine if this file was called index.css, it would be loading all of the new styling that we have onto the page here. So remember, eventually we want to break all of our CSS and HTML apart from each other. We still need to have the IDs and the classes on the elements, but then we can just use the link element to import a style sheet. So that is what we have for the lesson tonight, just a basic introduction to HTML and CSS. If you followed along last night and you got a GitHub account and you forked and cloned to your computer, now you can open up a text editor. Like I said, I use Visual Studio Code. I loaded up the entire folder into here. You can see that the first one is there. It's just the README on it. We won't have to worry about the first lesson tonight. The second lesson, though, you're going to open it up, and then there's going to be a homework folder. You're going to open up the homework README, and it's going to have a list of instructions to go down. It looks like a lot, but it's not too much. It's just getting you in the habit of writing these tags, these elements, and then what they do. And so then all of the HTML that you're going to write is going to be in this homework.html folder. Once you've started writing it in the homework.html file, go to a browser, click on File, Open File, and then go into the folder you have, pre-course. It should be in the Lambda School folder, HTML, CSS, homework, and then homework.html, and open that. That's fine. And you'll see a blank page here. But as soon as you start typing, let's go to HTML. Yeah. You save the file, you go back into your browser and you refresh, and you should now see that new stuff is in your browser. Okay, so your assignment for this task is going to go down and read through the instructions, create a basic HTML page, create the basic HTML layout using HTML head and body, add a title, etc. And you keep adding it and you keep refreshing your page, and then it will be done. So that being said, I'm going to open it up to a quick 10-minute question sesh. If you have any more questions after the class, please post them in the help. If you're having issues with Lesson 1, we do have a Lesson 1 channel. If you have questions about HTML and CSS in Lesson 2, we have a Lesson 2 channel, and we have TAs standing by and to help you out if you have any questions in there. Right now, if you can post your questions in the questions channel, and I'll get to as many as I can in the next 10 minutes. Our first question is the mini bootcamp different from the one last month? So this mini bootcamp is a recurring offering from Lambda School. So it's going to be essentially the same. There might be some tweaks here and there. We have extended it a little bit this month, so we have 12 lessons instead of 8 this month, and it's going to be a little bit longer, so we have more time to work on it. So it's going to be essentially the same. We're going to go over the basics of web development, right? HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We're going to get into some almost advanced JavaScript, and then tie it all together with DOM manipulation. So the topics don't change specifically each month. We kind of go over the basics of web development, but there will be updates to the curriculum each month. So if you did it before and you're doing it again, you'll see a lot of the same stuff in here, but then you're also going to see some changes as well when we get to the JavaScript portion especially. Is there a free version or type of web-based program besides CodePen? CodePen's free. So you can go and sign up for CodePen, and it's free. There's also there's a bunch of different sandbox environments like this. You go create new pen, and it signs you up. There's JS bin, which is free. I'm trying to think of some more that are JS bin. Yeah, so we have HTML, CSS, JavaScript in here. CodePen's really user friendly. I like to use it because it's just all right there, but CodePen is free. Cool. No, so when I say downloaded, I mean clone. Please, cloning, if I say download again about the repo, just know that I mean clone. Pretty interchangeable, but just that the verbiage on the GitHub page itself is, we want to make sure that we clone it. So I do want to reiterate, especially for those of you that weren't here last night, you need to make sure you fork your repo. If you don't fork it, then you are going to clone it, and you're going to work on it, and you're going to go turn it in, and it's not going to let you turn it in because you don't have access rights to the Lambda School GitHub organization. You have access rights to your own, and that will allow you to send in a pull request. So just make sure that when you are getting ready and getting all this stuff set up, that you fork the repo first. You have to fork it. Otherwise, a lot of your work might be lost. Finishing the mini bootcamp. So the question is, I applied. Other than finishing the mini bootcamp pre-work, is there anything else you recommend to heighten my chances of getting accepted? Finishing the mini bootcamp itself and being able to complete all these assignments are actually going to give you a leg up and give you a better chance of being accepted. We do give priority to the students that have shown us that they are willing to put the time in to go through the course, to finish all the problems, and really you've put the effort in, and that shows us a lot. For things to work on, other things while you wait, especially if you have a later acceptance date, like the July date if you're already done, there's a lot of resources out there on JavaScript. I recommend using websites like CodeWar or code fights that kind of just build up your basic syntax skills of JavaScript more. I would recommend building stuff with HTML and CSS. It's a lot of fun and gives you great hands-on experience. After you're done with the more advanced part of the JavaScript mini bootcamp, I would say that Eloquent JavaScript, which is a free book online, the first few chapters of it are come in great handy and will teach you a lot. But then just, kind of work on stuff, study stuff, and you will get a list of resources as well. I believe Karen will send you out a list of resources to work on too. But as far as getting accepted goes, showing that you're willing to put the work in and go through the mini boot camp and turn that work in, it just does go a long way. What's the difference between an internal and external style sheet? So an internal style sheet is going to be something where we write HTML head and we have style. Internal style sheet, we could call it, I don't think we call it internal style sheets, we would call it internal styles. This is really not done too often in a professional setting. So this is more something to use as a teaching tool, or if you're building a really small little web thing and you just want to add a couple of lines of styling to it, you would do this. Otherwise, the external style sheet is going to be creating a new file. So if we go into our assignment here, it's going to tell you at the very end, create a new file. So we can go in, create a new file. We're going to call it index.css. And now we have an external style sheet, and we have to go link it to our HTML page, right? And so we used that link. We use that link element and the location of the file we want to link. So that's an external style sheet. Okay, guys, well, that's going to about do it for me tonight. I'd like to thank you once again for hanging out, going over some basic HTML, CSS. There is an assignment tonight, so if you haven't forked and cloned the repo from GitHub, please do so, and then start working on that assignment. Any questions you have about that assignment, please put them in the Lesson 2 channel, and we will get to you and hopefully answer the questions you have. Other than that, we're going to continue on tomorrow with a little bit more of an intermediate CSS lesson, and we're going to talk about positioning on CSS and getting things to move around the screen the way we want them to, which is really exciting, but also kind of a difficult part of CSS. So thanks a lot for joining us tonight. And any more questions, please post them in the help channel or in the respective lesson channels. But have a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow.